thanks everyone for joining this evening for this webinar. I'm very pleased to be with all of you. Thanks for spending time with me this evening. So I think before I begin the remarks for today's topic, I think I should introduce myself and a bit of what I do before I get down to the topic of, what should we expect for 2021 given all the trends and situations we've encountered in 2020 this year. So first and foremost, So first and foremost, to introduce my organization, I'm from the Adam Smith Center. So we are founded in 2018, right? So we are registered in Singapore as an organization, and we are the first and only organization promoting a pro-market classical liberal message in academia, in media, and in society. So that's what I do. I'm a researcher, I'm an educator, I'm an academic. I'm currently doing my PhD now. And, contrary to what some of my recent critics believe, I'm not a two-man job or a one-man show. I am, well supported and advised by some esteemed individuals in my organization, and these include professors in Singaporean universities as well as business people, as you can see from the screen here. So a bit of what I do in my organization, we really shape the climate of ideas because we believe that ideas matter. When people believe in the right ideas, we have the right policies, we have a better future, right? If people believe in the wrong ideas, they have wrong thinking about government, about society, about the economy, then, bad things may happen, right? So things like media outreach, engaging with policymakers, hosting public events like these, workshops, when, it was more feasible before COVID, and as well as educational outreach. So this is a bit more about myself. I'm finishing my PhD right now at King's College London in political economy. I used to be from Spring, Singapore, advising small, medium enterprises in the area of human capital and human resources, right? And I was previously from NUS as well. And since the last few years, I've been, founding my organization as well as working with different education partners, of which academia is one of them. And so some articles I've written before in the media with my colleagues, as well as engaging with policymakers. They include MPs, Singaporean ministers, as well as foreign individuals as well. So we have held numerous events with different speakers, both local and overseas. So this include, one of Singapore's most renowned economists, Professor Linda Low, who is now from Singapore University of Social Sciences. So let me begin, the remarks for today. So I think, 2020 has been, what many people deem as a very terrible year, a very difficult year, very disruptive year, mainly because of the impact of COVID-19, right? So since, the disease struck society sometime, I think in February or March, we have had more than 1 million deaths actually. Last I checked, sometime last month. More than 1 million deaths and several million cases worldwide, right? And, so this has not only caused a health crisis, it's also been, very disruptive on many levels, social, economic, cultural, political as well. So I think at the end of this year, as we move forward to 2021, we're all thinking, okay, is this going to end, right? Are we going back to, an old normal, life as before? Or are things going to change fundamentally? How will a vaccine, which seems to have been announced recently, how would that change things? Is that going to, make life better? So I think that's the question on our minds today, and that's what I want to address. So feel free to ask me some questions later as well, right? So I think this is a magazine cover. It just came out a few days ago. This Time magazine, right? Apparently they've only used red crosses like that only very few times in their history. But they crossed the whole year out, saying that it's the worst year ever. So this I think was just like last week or like a few days ago, right? So I think this is on everyone's mind, right? Is it really the worst year ever, right? Or is this perhaps an exaggeration, right? Well, and not only that, right? Not only is it the worst year ever, which is what people say, capitalism, right, which is the economic system that we are in today, that the world is based on today, is again blamed, right? So you see some articles here by various news outlets, right, blaming the system of capitalism, right, for causing sometimes making the pandemic even worse, right? Is this true, right? How do we evaluate, our present day, economic institutions, government policies? What role do they play in, making our lives better or making things worse, given the conditions that we are in? And these are some questions that are always in my mind, questions I'm curious in, and I hope we can have a discussion on that today, right? I think that's a short-sighted view, in my opinion, right? So it's important to put things into perspective, right? When we look at things from a long run perspective, when we look at all the facts at the same time, I think the conclusion is far less dire than what many commentators have made it out to be, right? We are not living the worst time in history, and I'm happy to defend this thesis, right? Defend this argument, right? If I receive any challenges, right? Quite the opposite, right? And global capitalism, right, the economic system that we are in today, for all its faults, I'm not, a naive person saying there are no problems. It is nonetheless a part of the solution, not the problem, right? And I think what's important is that the government response is key. Whether or not we will move ahead with a better future in 2021, or we're going to experience stagnation and regress, really depends on the way governments respond to crises, respond to situations like what we've encountered this year. So really, we are in a critical stage, right? So policy responses make the difference, right? Sensible policies will expedite economic recovery, minimize needless deaths from COVID, right? Bad policies, ridiculous policies based on wrong ideas and wrong facts or you misconstrued statistics, right, will make things worse, right? But the problem, however, right, I will lay out a few problems that we've encountered this year. This is the first one, government red tape, right? So this is, don't take it from me. This is from, the NBC, right, earlier this year, saying that coronavirus testing delays caused by red tape, bureaucracy, and scorn for private companies. Right? Some of you may be wondering, what is this thing called red tape? Basically, it means, the cumbersome rules and regulations that are inherent in government organizations. Government organizations tend to work slowly. They tend to be, rather unresponsive to changes in society, to events that happen, right? And in a virus situation, in a pandemic, you need quick response, you need rapid recovery. But that's not what we saw earlier this year, right? There were red tape and bureaucratic, delays in the United States, specifically the CDC, which is the main, Center for Infectious Disease Control in the US, as well as the Food Drug Administration, the FDA, right? So it delayed early government response. It prevented the US government from rapidly deploying, therapeutics, right, diagnostic tests, right, to respond to the problem, right? And only in the summer period, in sometime in May, June, or July, did the United States government realize that they need to free up some of these rules. If we really want vaccines to be available within a year or two, which is really very short timeline, then we need the private sector, we need businesses, we need entrepreneurs, right, to have freedom to experiment, to come up with vaccines without being stifled by excessive red tape, right? So there was some change, right? So thinking about this, how do we relate this to our present condition in Singapore? Right. As we know, Singapore was rather hit as well earlier this year. And now we are thinking of whether or not we should reopen for travel, whether or not Singapore should, open up to tourists, not just business travelers, from people around the region in Southeast Asia and in Asia, right? And I think one of the problems here is that of red tape, right? And this is something I'm concerned about. And in fact, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, I was in another webinar just like this, and there were two MPs, members of parliament in Singapore from the PAP. They were talking about testing, and I just, rather politely asked them, why is it that in Singapore we don't have what we call elective drive-through testing? So some of you may know, if you look at the news, in other countries, if you want to be tested for COVID, you can. You can go to the clinic, you can go to the hospital and get tested. In Singapore, you can't get tested unless you get the approval of the government, unless the government says that you can be tested, right? So why is that the case? Why is that the case, right? That's something I'm concerned about, and I asked the MPs about it a few weeks ago, and I don't think they really had a good answer for me. I'll just leave it as that. So I am of the opinion that the longer we delay right? Mass testing, right? Diagnostic kits, even those, like finger pricks, a type of testing, rapid test kits. The failure to develop these practices will just prolong, economic, the economic disruption that we've experienced, right? We are not going to have life as per normal if we don't have rapid testing, because without testing, we do not know who has the virus, who doesn't have the virus, right? And we will not be able to resume travel, we will not be able to resume trade, which is, by the way, what Singapore really, really depends on. And not only do we have a problem with testing and in some countries, private sector response, um, there is arguably a problem of overreaction as well, right? So I have to say that now this is not the first time in human history that we've experienced a virus situation, a pandemic, but really this is the first time, if you really track it carefully, that we've experienced mass quarantines, mass societal lockdowns as a response. And I would argue, I put forth this argument, that a lot of it is based on an overreaction, right, on the part of governments in the early stages, right? So I think what happened was there was this guy actually. Some of you may have read him, right, or come across this person on the news, right? The guy on my slide. His name's called Neil Ferguson. Now I must say he's not a medical expert. Okay, he's not an epidemiologist. He's a what social scientists call an agent-based modeler. So this guy does statistics, right? So he has some models, right, which try to understand, human behavior and what happens if people, don't do anything. They don't have social distancing. They don't put on a mask. What happens if nothing is done? In a few months' time, his team projected there will be millions of people dying, right? So that was a very, extreme, a very extreme and radical prediction. And it so happened that at the time, under pressure, right, the US and UK government listened to this advice, right? They so happened to, and that's why they reacted with a rather drastic response, I would argue, which is really, to lock down society. And that's why even in Singapore, for a few months, I'm sure a lot of you would know, I see some students here, right, some young people here, some of you couldn't, go to school, right? You actually are learning from home as well. So I think a lot of what we see in the world, even Asian countries, really is just following the leadership of the UK and the US, right? The problem I have with these models is that it did not account for adaptation and adjustment. Now, I've spoken to some statisticians about this. I've spoken to some social scientists as well. The problem with these kind of predictions, right, is that it doesn't take into account the fact that people adapt to situations. We adjust, right? So the moment you hear that a disease has struck Singapore and the world, immediately you start taking precautions. You start wearing face masks on your own, you start washing your hands, you start avoiding crowds, right? Models do not account for such human agency. They don't account for such adjustments of human behavior. So it's a very crude analysis. And this crude analysis led to a very fear-driven decision, in my opinion, right? And the result we see, that we have seen actually, is very, lockdowns, right? Very quiet when you go, to, somewhere that's otherwise bustling, right? Orchard Road, City Hall, this is, somewhere in town, right? Completely quiet, which, by the way, has never happened before in Singapore, right? And over the last few hundred years, this is really the first time that such massive lockdowns have been employed, right? And what that has done, really, if you look back over the last few months, not just in Singapore, it's really what I call collateral damage, right? Right. So now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that the government. I know some of you have questions in your mind, right? Oh, I'm not saying that the government should just leave everything be and just let people drop dead like flies, right? I had this question 2 weeks ago in another webinar. So I believe that yes, when society is overwhelmed at the beginning and governments are prepared, it may be suitable, right? A lockdown may be a suitable response, right? But the problem that we see now is that the conditions we face today is very, very different from what we experienced the number of months back, right? The kind of knowledge that we have today about the virus is much more than what we had back then, a number of months back, right? So the conditions have changed. And I think now, ongoing lockdowns, which is what we really see in European countries, in parts of the United States, it continues to create a lot of collateral damage, right? What is this collateral damage, right? Mental health problems, social issues, right? Economic unemployment and problems, right? What we learned over the last few months, and I challenge all of you to check the news, right? Read up about this, right? Now, this disease affects the elderly, right? Now, if you are elderly, you are like many, many times more vulnerable to it. And if you have a comorbidity, right, basically you have pre-existing conditions as well, then you are even more likely to not only get the virus, but actually die from it, right? So I think what we need now is not, a blanket solution that treats everyone the same. The population is not homogeneous, right? We need to have a nuanced approach that treats everyone differently. People who are more at risk should have more precautions, right? We should isolate those people, but not everyone is equally at risk. I think it's wrong to assume that everyone is equally at risk, right? So young people, right, learners, people below the age of 25, especially 30, right? Just to give you an example, right? If you look at the hardest hit states in the United States, right, over the last few months, less than 5% actually of people who died were actually from below 30 years old, right? And that is a massive statistic that we should take into account, right? So young people, right? Some of you may be in this category: school closures, right? Mental isolation, mental health problems, people driven, into unemployment, driven into bankruptcy, right? Small businesses closed, right? I know this because I'm in an SME and I have friends who are owners of SMEs. I know businesses who shut down, earlier this year, right? People who are not as fortunate as me to be able to work from home, right? People who have really suffered, right? And not only this, right? We have had a lot of economic inequality as well, right? I have a lot of friends, and I suspect some people in this audience, you really care about inequality, right? The haves and the have-nots in society. There's some people who have a lot. Have they gotten poorer and worse off over the last 5 months? No. Some have gotten even richer, right? And guess what, right? Not only is global GDP estimated to contract, there is a disproportionate impact. The poor, the least well off, right? So just, throwing up some disturbing trends first before I encourage all of you later on, is that, the end of 2020, which is where we are at now, right? It may see an increase of more than 3% of poverty, an uptick, 176 million additional, not existing, additional poor people, right? If you measure poverty at, earning $3, right? And 177 million additional poor at 550. Worsening of class divides. This is what Singaporeans care about. But what is very interesting to me is that, I hear a lot of, social activists, right, in Singapore, people who are concerned about human rights, about inequality in Singapore, right? But somehow I find that it has been quite strange that they haven't really been very vocal about the inequality generated by the lockdowns, right? Why don't I hear, right, some of these activists, condemning the lockdowns, right, for generating inequality? Now, there is some debate actually. Some people say, oh, a lot of these problems, is because of the virus. It's not because of, the governmental response, right? Sure. But then again, look at how, different groups of people are hit differently, right? If you are in, a white collar job, you can work from home, you have a home office, you are not very much affected. But if you're a service staff, right? If you depend, for your wage, let's say you're waiting a table, you are part of a restaurant. We have had massive restaurant closures, right? The United States and the restaurant industry is completely devastated, right, because of this. So the unequal impact that we see suggests, right, that it is not the virus itself that's causing the problem, but really the blanket policy of locking down society that really is the root of this problem, right? And recently, this, I would encourage all of you to check this out. Recently, a few very brave, public health experts, right, from renowned universities, right, these individuals on the right-hand column, they actually released this thing called the Great Barrington Declaration, right? And they are not downplaying the severity of the virus. They are not minimizing its risk, but they are calling for a different approach, what they call a focused protection approach. And this focused protection approach says that some people are more at risk than other people, So because of this, let's have a targeted approach. Let people who are elderly and those who have pre-existing conditions, let those people be, receive most of the attention, right? Let's isolate those people. Let's have aggressive testing, right, of those people, especially like nursing homes, very vulnerable populations. But everyone else who are at minimal risk, and I think we need to be intellectually honest enough to admit, right, that not everyone is at equal risk, right? Let these people, live their lives, right? Live their lives, right? And if you think that's just some isolated, argument by some people, well, let me introduce you to this person called Donald Henderson, right? Check him out, Google him, right? This person is renowned epidemiologist. He's credited with the eradication of smallpox, right? He unfortunately passed away in 2006. He was responsible for international vaccination programs, which really, had a major impact on smallpox eradication. He wrote some very influential articles saying, I quote him, not my words. I'm not, a scientist, but he is, right? An expert on this. Large scale quarantine was so extreme, right? Not rational, so extreme that it should be eliminated from serious consideration. Communities faced with epidemics respond best and with the least anxiety when the normal functioning of the community is least disrupted, right? So I think the cure cannot be worse than the disease, right? If let's say you have a disease, you have an illness, the cure cannot be worse, right? So I think it's very, very important to weigh, right, the cost and benefits, right, of every action that we do, right? Every action has a consequence, every action has a cost. Every choice costs something, right? So I think if vaccine is not a panacea, everyone's talking about, oh, vaccine, right, it's gonna help us go back to life as per normal. But yes, it's very important, but that's only one part, right, of a larger response. Is one part of a larger social response, right? And what we need now is a strategy that comes innovation.
I don't know, you measured that day, anyhow. You don't always like rhetoric one, no?
Right?
You're like that and my like that is different.
Okay. Sorry, I think there's someone speaking. Okay, next, what else? Okay, so thank capitalism, right? So what we have, right, a vaccine, right, that's developed in 1 year, right? So if the news is to be believed, we have a vaccine that's been developed in 1 year, right? And this is the result of rapid market innovation, right? This is not something that the government could have done itself, right? So thank capitalism for this technology. And remote work opportunities provided economic lifeline when governments shuttered the fiscal economy, right? E-commerce and digital economy provide virtual escape. Not only does it provide virtual escape, many businesses in Singapore have been transforming themselves with technology and digitalization. I know this because I'm trying to help an SME do this, and I have many friends still in the government where I used to work, and we are, in Singapore, right? We are talking about digitalization. So these new technologies and trends helping our businesses grow. So these are very positive trends that we can take into account and look forward to, right? Okay, and the last point is I think very interesting. Historically speaking, and I did some research on this, right? Think about the most severe pandemic in history. I think most people point to 1918, right, when we had the Spanish flu, which really devastated a huge portion of the world's population, right? Devastated many societies, right? If you look at the trends, right, pandemics before 1918 and after 1918 worked very differently. Whenever there was a disease or virus outbreak before the Spanish flu, let's say in the 1800s and 1700s, it would probably like wipe out like 80-90% of the world's population, right? We know that, right? When, for example, when Europeans would go to South America or Africa, right, to colonize societies, right, they would bring with them the viruses and germs, and indigenous local people in those countries, they would have no immunities, right? They will have no, defense system, right, against these foreign pathogens coming in, right? And so it will just wipe out, 80-90% of the world's population. But why haven't we seen such, a massive devastation in virus outbreaks after 1918? And we have had that, right, in 1958, 59, 48, 49, 68, 69. These were, polio, right, happened, right, the Asian flu, right, in 1958. It would not devastate 80, 90%, of people the way past pandemics did. And why is that the case? Why is that the case? Now, remember Sunetra Gupta, the Oxford epidemiologist. She has a very, powerful thesis. She wrote in an article, right, in a journal, right, that the reason is because of global capitalism, right? It's because in the 20th century, right, human beings were exposed to global trade, right? We're exposed to globalization. That means that we are in greater contact with people, right? You go overseas for school, you go overseas to travel. So because of the increased social contact between individuals, we now have developed natural immunities to viruses, right? Natural immunities that people in historic times in the 1800s and 1700s do not have, right? So the very fact that the virus that we experience today has not devastated like 90% of the world's population is precisely because human beings have evolved and progressed so much over the last 100 years, right, due to globalization, due to trade, due to contact with strangers, that we now have the natural immunities to defend against most viruses, right? So that's actually where we are at today, right? So I think it's important, I'm about to end my presentation, it's important to put things in perspective, right? So we need to have a sense of perspective. Now, I'm not discounting the misery that some people have experienced. Some people have died. Some people have, massively suffered. That's true. But at the same time, we need to have a sense of perspective, right? We are still living in one of the best possible times in human history. Would you rather live now, in 2020 in Singapore, or would you rather be back in 1600s and 1700s when you probably drop like a fly, right? Whenever a virus would enter, your community, right? And this is something I feel really strongly about. I've been speaking about this in a number of occasions. Global poverty today is at an unprecedented low, right? And please remember this. This is a great milestone, right? Earlier this year, if I'm not wrong, I think early this year or December 2019, humanity, we have reached a very important milestone. More than half the world's population today is middle class or richer. Okay, middle class or richer. That's, if I'm not wrong, about 3.8 billion people, right? So at least half of the whole world's population is middle class or richer. And this has never been the case. This is the first time, right, it has happened, right? I think that's great progress, right? And technological advancements have continued at a rapid pace. Advancements that we rely on today, right? Without this technology, I cannot even, be interacting with all of you, right, over this webinar, right? So people today are living richer lives, they're living better lives, right? There's a lot written about this. I can go on and on. So this is one of the charts that I really love showing. I strongly encourage people, especially young people. I think some of you are students here. Check out this great website called Our World in Data. It is a treasure trove of information, right? It is a treasure trove of graphs and diagrams showing how the world has changed over the last few decades, the last few hundred years, right? The world's population living in extreme poverty today, right? The proportion has declined tremendously, right? And I think this graph, speaks really for itself, right? Now, of course, I know some people are saying money is not everything, economic growth is not everything. It's about happiness, it's about, mental health. Yeah, yes, that's totally true, right? But without wealth, right, you will not be free, right, to pursue, right, post-material aspirations, right? Wealth, the ability to put food on the table every day for your family, for your child, that is very important, right? Without that, you can't talk about saving the whales, saving, the environment, the trees, right? Right? That those are post-material needs. So economic growth is fundamentally very, very important at the end of the day, right? So with that, I end my presentation. I'd like to do some promotion, right? So our organizer today is Academia Education, one of our leading enrichment centers in Singapore, right? As Rachel mentioned, humanities-oriented philosophy, right? And I'm proud to be a partner. I'm proud to be part of academia. And come 2021, we have new digital resources and learning experiences for you, right? And this is for myself, right? This is, please feel free to, scan this QR code, which will link you to my various pages, right? At the end of the day also, I'm very happy to say some of what I shared today, right, is actually in a book, right? I've actually written this book, I think, beginning of this year. Actually, by the way, before COVID struck, okay, I was writing this book about how we should be optimistic about global trends, about the world that we are living in, and then, pandemic struck in March, right? Am I still an optimist? I believe so. Yes, right? And I'm happy to respond to whatever challenges, right, or skeptical doubts you may have, right? So feel free to share more. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Rachel. I'm happy to give it over to you to host and moderate some Q&A if you wish. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Bryan. I'm sure everyone really enjoyed your sharing for this session. I believe we have one question that Jeremy Ling has shared in the chat. It says, although lockdowns may create massive collateral damage, may I know whether you view the lockdown as necessary? If lockdown is removed, there may also be an excessive, uncontrollable spread of the virus, and it's not possible to accurately pinpoint who is at risk. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. So now I think Singapore's lockdown at the beginning, sometime we call it a circuit breaker. I think that was justified because at that time we didn't have enough information. Okay, we didn't have enough information about the virus, about its causal factors, about who's at risk, who's not as much as risk, where it even came from. So I think as a precautionary measure, I think that was justified at the time, right? But I think ongoing lockdowns, if we seriously consider one today, I don't think that's justified because we have changed. The conditions have radically changed, and it is simply not true to say that we don't know enough. We didn't know enough back then, but we know a lot today, right? It remains a fundamental fact. I mean, you have to look at the science, right? I mean, we have a scientist that was right showing you on my slides, right, clearly pointing out that if you are from the older age groups, okay, and if you have a pre-existing condition, you are many more times more likely to die from it, and that cannot be denied. In fact, we knew this even in April and May, right? And that's precisely the reason why the Singapore government knows this, right? So if you just rewind, I think 1 to 2 weeks back, you hear our Minister of Trade and Industry, Minister Chan Chun Sing, announcing that we need to adopt a risk management strategy. A risk management strategy, not a risk elimination strategy. And I think there's a lot of wisdom, right, in what our PAP, government said. So I think the Singapore government has had a great balance, right? Early stage precautionary lockdowns, yes, but now let's try to open up. That's why we're pursuing various agreements, right? And plans with Hong Kong, with Indonesia to open up slowly. I think it's a bit too slow for my taste, but I think they are going in the right direction, right? So I think it's important to weigh, the cost and benefits of every action, right? I just want to pose this hypothetical example here. Now, do you know how many people die from car accidents in a given year? Thousands of people, by the way, thousands. In the United States, 39,000 people die from a car accident every single year. Is that unfortunate? Yes, it is. But what is the cost, of a risk elimination strategy? Let's say, fine, we can eliminate car accidents, right? We can say all the drivers, you would just drive at, 5 kilometers per hour, right? Yeah, you could do that, and perhaps you could eliminate the risk entirely. All those 39,000 people will still be with us today. But what is the cost? Traffic will come to a standstill. Society will be completely disrupted if cars can only travel at 5 km per hour, right? So is the cost worth it, right? That's the question. And some people, I know some response you may give. Some people say, oh, you can't use the cost-benefit analysis to human lives, right? You can't put a price on human life, right? But, cost is with us, right? There is a choice, right, that governments have to make. And every choice has a cost. Every choice has a consequence, right? And so I think Singapore has struck a good balance. But I think some countries today, parts of the United States, continuing to shut down, now, given that we know so much already, given that we know some people are so much more vulnerable, I don't really think that's wise. I don't really think that's really scientific to begin with, right? So I think, as I said, yes, there is a place for shutting down, but not at this moment, not at this point.
Okay. I think a lot of what you're saying is also to do with individual responsibility, because if individuals are not responsible, then locking down in a very strict way might be the only way. As Pauline has also shared her thought, for many countries such as the UK and the USA, there are many people that know enough, but they don't do enough. For instance, Trump supporters blatantly breaking social distancing and mask wearing rules. How can then the risk management strategy of countries be modified without escalating to the point of lockdown?
Okay, so now, first of all, okay, I think at the end of the day, everyone has different levels of risk, right? So thinking about risk in some collective abstract sense is very, very vague, right? So I think fundamentally, life has risk. Okay, everything you're doing has risk. Okay, the building I'm sitting here, it might collapse. There is a high risk. There's a risk, right? I think to live is to have risk. Okay, the question is not about how much risk there is. It's about what level of risk actually is sensible, right? You don't kill a fly by burning an entire house down, right? You don't do that, right? So I think it's important to have a very nuanced approach, right? Now, as I said, I'm not an extreme, dogmatist here. Now, I completely agree that in some cases we need mandates, right? So I'm in support of, mask mandates, right? Because I think when you put on face masks, it's very low cost. It's a low cost action. It doesn't create a lot of inconvenience. It doesn't make you go crazy, right? So if you're complaining about masks, I think that's just wrong. So I think there is a place for face masks and for governments to impose that on people, right? If they're not responsible, if they don't do it voluntarily, I think mandated vaccinations. I think that's right. I think the cost of a vaccine, in terms of the risk, I think it's very low. So I think it's fully justified for governments to have mandates to vaccinate people. Yes. So I'm not dogmatic about it. But when you say you want to radically re-engineer society, basically, which is what it is, right? So I think we need to know how radical and how unprecedented this is, right? We have had people, writing in the newspaper saying that, this is going to change humanity forever, right? We can't own pets, we can't go to schools anymore, right? We can't meet our friends anymore. So there's some really extreme, crazy, suggestions that we've heard. And that's what I'm against, right? We have to know this is unprecedented. We have never dealt with a disease. We have never dealt with a virus like this before, right? We've never dealt with it in 58, 59. We've never dealt with it like this in 68, 69, right? And this risk management is actually what we do every day, right? We manage our risk. We manage our risk every day, right? So what the Singapore government has said, not me, Singapore government has said, risk management, I think that's really, really the best approach, right? There is risk, but let's see how we can minimize it, how we can adjust ourselves, policies along the way. It's difficult, right? Public policy is not a science, it's really an art. The Singapore government is trying the best.
Okay, so you mentioned risk management by the government. So I guess we will all understand that in every society, there are people with different risk tastes. There are people who are at higher risk, like you mentioned earlier, and there are also people at lower risk. So when it comes to the government deciding the best way to manage risk, what are your views on that? What is the most measured approach, I guess?
Well, I would say look at the science. Look at the science. Listen to what the experts are saying, right? Now, I know you may be saying, but experts are saying different things. But if you actually listen to the real experts, a lot of the experts, so-called experts on the other side who are saying we want to lock down, a lot of those people are statisticians, right? Let me just give you a very simple example, right? I was listening to the news a few days ago, and there was this guy saying, okay, if you measure the infection rates, the transmission rate of virus, and we calculate the population numbers in a given society, and if the government doesn't impose any mandates, you have X number of people that we project in the next few months that will get the virus and die from it. We don't do anything about it. Well, that's not medical science. That's just numbers, That's just numbers game, right? Because what really is science that if you actually look at different vulnerabilities of people, right, they are fundamentally different. As I said, older people are more likely to die from it. Younger people, there is really a very low chance. I'm not saying there's no risk, right? But there is a really, really low risk. So I think on a social level, public policy should always be based on a cost-benefit analysis. What is proportionate and what is not proportionate, right? So if you look at some cities, New York, even in the Swedish case, Australia, right, 2/3 of many of these deaths were concentrated, right? I repeat again, concentrated, not in schools, by the way, concentrated in nursing homes, in assisted living facilities. These are clear trends. You don't need a statistician to tell you that. These are clear trends. Target those people, protect the vulnerable, but everyone else, people who are 16, people who are 18, they need to develop immunities. They need to develop, natural immunities. Of course, take precautions, wash your hands, social distance, put a mask, right? But to say that young people cannot go to schools, and some people say, let's just close schools for 5 years, that is extreme. I think that's wrong. That's not scientific. But I think, moving beyond the issue of virus, right? I think my larger message for everyone today is, don't be too, pessimistic. I would say yes, coronavirus is bad. It has disrupted society, right? But if you look at the trend that we've experienced over the past few decades, over the past few hundred years, right? We have a lot of reasons to be optimistic. A lot of reasons, right? And I think that's my larger message, not so much of like virus and all that, right? So this book, I just want to come back to talk about it. This book, The Optimist Guide to the Future, is sold by Beard and Balloon, sold by academia, education, and I write in this book about not just public health. I talk about the environment, right? I talk about inequality. I talk about social issues, right? We can have a conversation about this, right? Inequality around the world on a global level has declined, not increased, by the way, right? Global inequality has declined tremendously. Why? Because people are getting richer in developing countries, right? The environment, right? Is it getting worse? Well, that's debatable. But there's so much progress, right? Technologies, right? Firms, civil society, NGOs, right? Providing solutions to global problems, finding ways to mitigate climate change, right? Resolving deforestation, right? There are so many of these positive trends, right? That are happening. But sometimes, you know what? The media, right? And the pessimistic environment around us, it obscures our vision. It obscures us, from all these, positive trends. And I guess that's my main message, right? Life is not as bad as we think, right? And I would say 2020, as bad as it is. Now, I'm not saying it's easy, right? My life has been very, very tough the last few months, juggling like 7 things, right? But you know what? It's not as bad as we think.
Thank you. So I think what you're saying is something that makes a lot of sense. We are definitely living in an age where we are a lot more privileged, and we are definitely very lucky to be in Singapore ourselves, because this is where we have a lot of resources. Our government is very supportive. But at the same time, some people may have concerns with this kind of very pragmatic approach. Jeremy Ling, he pointed out, but by only protecting those at risk, like the aged and young, governments are in a sense shunning the well-being of the middle-aged. In that case, is it still justified for governments to only protect those at risk of death by the virus and not everyone who has the potential of getting the virus?
Okay, I understand where you're coming from, but I'm okay. No, I'm not saying that the government only cares for few people, right? I'm saying that precisely if you wish to care about the whole society, if you wish to have a swift recovery, right, from this virus, you need to look at public health in all measures, right? You cannot look at public health only in one dimension, right? If you think about the health side effects of lockdowns, we've had increase in cancer actually over the last few months, because people cannot go to see the doctor in some countries. They can't get cancer screening. We've had people with aggravated back, leg problems, right, because they were sitting at home too much, right? We've had people experiencing mental breakdowns, panic attacks, right? Because they feel that civilization is stopping, you can't go out on the streets. That's public health as well. So I care about those people, right? We need to look at public health in all measures, in all dimensions, right? Yes, we protect people from COVID, but there are so many other aspects of well-being, so many other aspects of economic, social, and mental well-being that we must care about as well. So we cannot look at things from one dimension. I'm actually very holistic. I'm actually looking at all dimensions, right? I want the working mom, right, who's unable to find a job now because restaurants are closed. She cannot be a waiter right now because restaurants are closed. I want her to be able to find a job. I want her to have a wage so she can put food on the table. Those people are very important too. We cannot shut them out of the economy, which is what I'm not saying Singapore, but some countries are doing this. And that I don't think is really caring for everyone.
Thank you. So, just calling for any last questions. Please post them in the chat if you have any. Otherwise, Bryan, just to go back to the title of this whole webinar, 2021 for Better or for Worse. You're taking a very optimistic stance. So maybe you can share with us one thing or a few things that you personally you're looking forward to for next year, and we too should look forward to.
Well, I'm looking forward to, the continuation of several hundred years of human progress, that started, since the Industrial Revolution that started in the 1700s and 1800s. Now, okay, I have to say here that, for most of human history, right, people are poor, right? People now, so poverty is not something strange for us to, oh, why are people poor, right? Poverty, and misery has always been a natural condition. If you think about wealth and riches or GDP as a chart, it's always been like this. It's always been stationary. But something happened in the 1700s, in the 1800s. There's a huge jump in wealth, in living standards, right? And why is that the case? Why is that the case? Because people now have the opportunity to trade with one another. People now have the freedom to set up business, to be free, to participate in market exchange, right? We may think, this is very, commonsensical, but that has not been normal in human history. So ever since the last few hundred years, we have had great human progress because of market capitalism, because of economic freedom, because we have transitioned to a society that's based on human rights, democracy, capitalism. So what I'm looking forward to is the continuation of these several hundred years of progress, and not have policies and people interrupting this progress that we've already had for the last few hundred years. Some specific examples: I care a lot about inequality. I have written about this. In this book, I've talked about it. I know a lot of young people care about this. You care about inequality. You care about environmentalism. You care about human rights and poverty. I care about that too, and I believe that all these things can be mitigated with a lot of these positive trends that we've seen, right? Technological trends, economic trends, a lot of them documented here. So I would say I would say my last point is, right, life is not as bad as we think, right? It's much better than we think, right? But we need to understand the causes of human progress, what contributed to these things, right? How we can move forward. And I would say, check out this website, right? For more information, Beard and Balloon, check out this website, right? And I'm happy to have this conversation further. Thank you.
Amazing sharing from Bryan today. Definitely go over to beardandballoon.com to check out his up and coming book. A lot of the things that he mentioned to look forward to for next year, we're definitely all looking forward to it. There's so much new technological advancements, new technology that we can look forward to. More immediately, there's Christmas. And also one last thing that I'm really, really looking forward to is next Thursday, the same time, academia is hosting another webinar. We are going to be talking about environmentalism and literature, and it will be hosted by academia's in-house literature connoisseur, Sarah Lin. So Bryan will be around as well, I'm sure. We will all have a very interesting discussion. We will learn about eco-criticism. It's a literature theory. If you have your thoughts about the environmentalism in Singapore or just environmentalism in general, definitely head over to our Facebook page. You'll be able to find a registration link, and then you can come and join us again next Thursday at 8:30 p.m. Bryan, do you have any last words for us?
Rachel, perhaps you might also want to share the last webinar we have at the end of the month. There's yet another one as well.
Yes, definitely. So, like Bryan mentioned, right after next week, at the end of this month, we are going to have a webinar combining both Bryan and Sarah. It will definitely be very interesting as they come together to share their maybe not so aligned perspectives on certain issues that I'm sure everyone will be interested in. It will be a very, very interesting discussion on topics that will involve everyone that are relevant to us today. Yes. Information for that webinar will be up very soon on our Facebook and Instagram page. So follow academia.com.sg on Facebook and Instagram for more information. At the same time, you can follow Bryan via his Adam Smith Center channels as well. Yes. If there's nothing else, yes, thank you very much, Bryan, for hosting this webinar for us. If there's nothing else from everyone else, have a very, very good evening. Have a restful night and TGIF for tomorrow.
Thank you very much for your time. I'm humbled